Hi, this is my review of Battlestations 2nd edition, the game of heroic starship adventure. This is the review of the box set. There is an advanced manual that contains all of the rules for this board game slash RPG hybrid. This box set is quite interesting to talk about because it can get a bit confusing. You don't know if it's a standalone board game or if it's an introduction to the RPG. You could say that it is both, but I will talk more about that in a few moments. It reminds me a lot of those old TSR box sets that pretended to be board games, but they were in fact an introduction to Dungeons and Dragons. So let's start talking about the quality of the components. There are a lot of components in this box. Let's talk about the box itself first. The box is very sturdy. It's a really high quality box. It won't break down in a few years like it happens to many other board game boxes. It's going to serve you for a long time. The insert is also pretty good, very sturdy, but it's not too specialized. It only has a few compartments where you can keep different pieces, but if you want to keep things in order for every time that you want to play this game, I recommend that you use plastic bags or perhaps some small plastic boxes to separate the different tokens, the cards, etc. Now let's talk about the contents of the box. You have these small multicolored glass bits to keep track of different things that I will talk about in a few moments. You also have these small square bases that indicate the classes of the different characters. There are also good quality cards with the stats of the different character classes, the alien species, and there are also cards that indicate other gameplay elements. For example, you have what would be considered feats in other games, and there are also some event cards. Now, when it comes to the tokens and tiles, they are also of good quality. They are quite sturdy. It's very easy to tell apart the graphics, what each tile and token represents. And now when it comes to the miniatures, they are a bit of a mixed bag. In general, the design of the miniatures is great. It's quite, not exactly original, but I would say that it's a good representation of 80s sci-fi tropes. This style of science fiction feels a lot like a combination between Flash Gordon and Star Wars. So if you like that sort of old school style, I think you will like the design of the miniatures. However, when it comes to the quality, it is not exactly... it's decent. There are many mold lines. Some of the weapons are pretty bad when it comes to that. They have like this very thin plastic layer around them. And some of the features are not exactly that great. When it comes to the eyes, the mouth, the nose, you can barely tell apart the features. And many pieces of the plastic, they come quite bent. So you will have to use a blow dryer or the warm water method to get them straight. But I really love the designs. I think that's the strong point of the miniatures and the characters in general. Although the art in some of the cards isn't that good either. But like I said, when it comes to the concepts that you have the elephant man and the lion man and this very weird alien species like an agglomeration or some sort of like a bundle of plants and fungi and some insect men, this like a bunch of tendrils, sentient bunch of tendrils with weapons, so they are quite awesome. Another alien kind of looks like this mound of minerals, and there is this huge robotic suit as well. So overall, the components are really good actually, despite the criticisms that I mentioned, and the manual included, which is a basic manual of the different things that you can do in the game. Some people could think that this is just the extent or the reach of the rules, but this game is quite deep. The introductory manual itself clearly shows that you can do many things in a single turn, and that all of the scenarios become quite intricate, very deep. I forgot to mention the maps. They're like sectors in space, divided by hexes and with numbers of the different sections. That is, when you're moving your ship, this is quite useful for hidden information sort of scenarios. You can write down in a piece of paper your exact location, that I am currently at C3 and things like that. And you also have a pad of character sheets, so you can keep track of things. And I also forgot to talk about the dice that come in the game. They are decent, they are not very precise, that is, the borders are quite round, but they do the job. You have a huge die to indicate the passage of certain elements in the scenarios, and some of the map tiles, or rather the spaceship tiles, if you turn them around, they have this section to track different things related to the game. So overall, the components are good, despite my criticisms. I really like them, but you may have to get adjusted to the idea that you will need proxies depending on how you play the game. You only have a few examples of the different species of aliens when it comes to the miniatures. So if you wanted like a crew of lion men, you only have one lion character. Or if you wanted a crew of elephant men, you only have one. So you will have to rely on proxies. They are just there to facilitate gameplay a little, but depending on your crew configuration, you may need other things. Also, if you want to fight battles with different spaceships at the same time, you will need to perhaps come up with your own, either buy another box set or design your own tiles, because at most you will be able to accommodate, I haven't played in that mode, but I think it probably accommodates up to 3 or 4 spaceships at the same time. But depending on the spaceship configuration, if you wanted perhaps 5 or 6 spaceships, or if you wanted more complex designs, then you will need to either create your own tiles or purchase another box. In fact, I think this is one of the few cases in which it's worth it to purchase 2 box sets, so you have more miniatures, more tiles, etc. Now let's talk about the game itself. So what is exactly Battlestations? I also forgot to mention the quality of the paper of the instruction manual is really good. It's semi-glossy, the graphic design looks great, the organization is also good, and everything is very clear, very easy to understand how to play this game. So the main theme of this game is rebellion. You have this tyrannical government, and the player characters become involved in this fight. At first they didn't seem too committed to the situation, to the conflict, but because the government messed with them, now they become a part of the rebellion, of the rebel forces. So it's the typical sci-fi trope of an evil force, a government that is trying to enslave people, and these people that are fighting back. This game includes 8 missions to play a campaign, but you have enough information to create your own missions. So in that way, it is a standalone box. But like I mentioned at the beginning, you have many different tokens and species that you do not know how to use. They have advanced rules that only come in the advanced manual. And I think that's a weaker point of this game. You could say that they could have included a physical copy of the complete manual, but maybe, let's say that it would be too expensive. Because the price of the game is quite fair in my opinion, but if they included the complete rulebook, maybe it would have been a lot more expensive. But maybe they could have included some code for the PDF version. That would have been great if they included a code so that you could download the manual from DriveThruRPG. It is actually there. It would have been awesome. But no, there is no such code, so it feels a bit like a subtle way of encouraging you to purchase the advanced rulebook, because they include those components that you cannot use with the basic rulebook. The expansion also contains, and I will review the expansion in a future review, it contains some things that require the advanced rulebook. Let's talk about the sequence of play. During each phase of the game, there are certain steps to follow. First, the ship moves in a separate map. You have your map representing the interior of the different ships, and you also have this area in space, and you will be moving your spaceship across that map. So the spaceship moves and the enemy ships move as well. Then there is missile movement or resolution. You shoot out missiles and they will be moving towards their target. They are kind of like tracer missiles, or yes, like remote control missiles. After that, there is character actions. Here is where everything happens. You move, you fight, you perhaps heal a wounded ally or yourself, you activate different devices, and I can't wait to talk about the things that you can do in this game in a few moments. After that, you have the enemy actions phase. It's the same, but instead of the player characters acting, it's the enemy forces. And then you have the end of phase. Depending on the scenario, some other effects could happen during those steps, and then a new phase begins. So when it comes to the things that you can do in this board game, I was talking with my friend David E. Beatty of the Weird Trails role-playing game. If you haven't seen that review, please check out the playlist in the description below. That's a sort of Weird West, Lovecraftian setting in the style of Dungeon Crawl Classics. But I was telling him in an email that I almost didn't purchase this game because of a pretty bad review that I read some time ago. In that review, the writer basically said that it was such a horrible game because you couldn't do anything, that the rules were too simple, and that sometimes you had a lot of like dead time or moments where you couldn't do anything and you had to wait for your turn. But it's obvious that person only played perhaps 2 of the scenarios of the 8 scenarios included, and I think that's a flaw in this game. The first 3 scenarios are too simple, extremely simple. If you only play those scenarios, you're going to think that this game is like a kiddie version of sci-fi, like there is almost nothing to do. You immediately lose interest in playing the game if you think those are the only rules. In fact, I think even little kids wouldn't enjoy this game because the turns are too simple. I think they should have included more rules in the first 3 scenarios. In some ways, this game reminds me of Earth Reborn, but Earth Reborn has such an excellent tutorial. From the very start, there are so many things to do. It's one of my favorite board games of all time. But here, they introduce just 1 or 2 rules per scenario, and you want to do so many more things. I think that's also, it could be considered false advertisement, but in the box, they indicate that this game can be played with 1 to 9 players. But you cannot play this game as a single player game with the contents of this box alone. The solo rules come included in the advanced manual. Now, I'm not saying that this was with malicious intent, that the designer, the publisher was like, I'm going to trick everyone by telling them that this is a 1 to 9 players game. But some people could purchase it thinking that the option to play as a solo player is included in this board game, and it is not included. If you like solo board games, please check out my video where I talk about how to play solo board games in the description. Maybe that way, using the tools that I mentioned in that video, you could play this starter set, this box set, because it sometimes feels like a starter set. You could play it alone. But like I said, you have enough elements to play it as a standalone experience. But if you want the complete rule set, you will definitely need the other book. So this game is an asymmetrical game. You have the game master sort of player that controls the enemy forces, and the other players are going to be playing as the different alien species. You can have a mixed crew, and that's one of the more fun aspects of this game. You can have your crew of elephant man and crocodile man and human, and there are even robots. If you're playing with less than 4 people, for example, you would need robots to participate as the other characters. So in that sense, this is a good one-on-one sort of experience. I played this game with 2 players. I was the one controlling the enemy forces, and they controlled a character each. One controlled a human marine, the other one was a chitara. I don't remember the name of the species, like chitahoy, something like that. It's kind of like a cheetah woman, and it was a scientist. And the other 2 robots would fill the roles of pilot and mechanic. So if you only have 1 player to play with you, or if you are playing this solo, either with the solo rules of the rulebook or my tips that I gave you in the video that I'm going to put in the description, then you could have just one player with the other robots serving as a sort of as tools. Because they are robots, they are not thinking by themselves. They are not very advanced, let's say. Then you will have that crew a substitute for the other players. In fact, the robots can end up destroyed and they do not advance along with your character. Although there are ways to balance the scenarios, don't think that because it's just one character advancing, the scenarios are also tailored or custom made so that based on level, they present an adequate challenge. So you're going to be moving your pieces in the interior of the ships, depending on the mission, and I will talk about the missions in a few moments, and each tile has a sort of battle station feature to it. You have these star-shaped squares in the tiles, and if you step on them, you can activate a specific module. Maybe you want to pilot the ship around the map, then you will need to go to the piloting area, or that's the helm. Or maybe you need to add more power to the different systems, because when you are shooting and making maneuvers, your ship could end up spending power. And you need to shift power and produce power in the engines room. You also have the cannons and the missiles area to attack your enemies. There are also more interesting tiles, like for example the teleport tile that allows you to teleport your crew members inside of the enemy ship to carry out an assault, a direct assault, but you could also teleport a bomb inside the ship. You could also use the science area to launch a probe to try to figure out something, obtain information from the enemy so that the targeting systems are more effective. You make a science check and then you shoot out your missile or you attack the enemy, you fire at the enemy, and it's easier to hit because of your check. So that's when I realized that review was completely wrong, because there's always something that you can do during each turn. But like I said, it's the 3 beginning scenarios that perhaps disappoint people, but they aren't even scratching the tip of the iceberg. I also remember almost not getting the game because that review mentioned that there was no depth to combat, but considering you have special abilities for each species that could affect combat related to movement and attack, and taking into consideration the gear and weapons that you can use, added to that the tactical options of popping out into a corner, shooting and getting back into position to avoid counterattacks, or stepping just a little bit closer to the corner, taking some shots while receiving the defensive advantage of your position, then that is completely wrong. This game has enough tactical depth when it comes to combat, that is a character against another character or several characters. Now, every check in this game is made by rolling 6-sided dice. Depending on the attack, perhaps you only roll 2. If you're making some sort of check to activate a battle station, you want to make a science check, or if you want to launch a missile, you roll your couple of dice and you add some modifiers, your stats, or perhaps something related to a particular tool. But when it comes to ship-to-ship combat, then you need to roll more dice depending on the weapon that you are using. Perhaps you are using missiles or a charged shot. And that's when all of these feat-like features come into play. As you level up, and at the start of the game, you choose one of these special abilities that allows you to be better at different checks. They give you additional luck points. There is a stat that represents luck to make those rerolls. There are also some abilities that allow you to make powerful, potentially devastating close quarters attacks. Or maybe you are really good with a weapon, you can do this sort of Overwatch attack where you are waiting for the enemy to step in front of you or to do something, and you shoot at that enemy outside of the normal turn sequence. You have different skills for each character. You have athletics, combat, engineering, piloting, science, and they all have to do with different things related to the task or action at hand. Of course, if you are going to avoid some sort of attack, then you make an athletics check. There are some disintegrator weapons. You need to make that check to avoid being disintegrated. It's like you dodge to the side or something. When it comes to combat, that's the stat that you're going to add to your dice when you're making attacks. When it comes to engineering, that's the modifier that you are going to add during your engineering checks. And you also have other things like the number of spaces that you can move, the hit points before you end up dying. You also have a target number, which is kind of like your protection or armor class against attacks when you are being targeted. You also have luck, as I mentioned, which allows you to make some rerolls. And you have hands. This is to indicate what sort of things you can carry with you. If you are using a two-handed weapon, then you do not have a free hand and you won't be able to make some checks. But there are alien species that have several arms, so those alien species could carry many objects and still be able to do different checks and use abilities, etc. And although the different species have natural abilities, you also have professions. Like I said, you are either a marine, a scientist, a mechanic, or a pilot, and you are going to be more skilled at checks related to those professions. When you attack an enemy ship, you will have to randomly determine where you manage to strike that ship. There could be some other factors that may modify this, but you are going to be making these rolls. Perhaps you manage to completely destroy an area of the enemy ship, or maybe you just shake it up a little, or maybe you attack a module where there are several enemy characters and you end up injuring them or even killing them. Now, when it comes to killing other characters, I think this is an excellent game to do that because there is cloning. All of the characters, when they are killed, supposedly they manage to clone them, and now they are able to participate in the next adventure. They will miss out on some experience rewards, but that's the cool thing. The game master can go all out and kill the player characters because they are cloned already before the mission starts, so their clones will be ready for the next mission. In fact, each campaign has a requirement to win the campaign. Either the game master wins or the player characters win, depending on the number of victories that are scored. So let's say that you are playing a campaign of 8 scenarios and the game master wins 3 scenarios, he wins the campaign. This introductory rulebook contains different pieces of gear. You have blasters, lasers, disintegrators, vibra knives and energy blades, but there are also toolkits and jetpacks. The jetpack is quite fun to use. It allows you to move quickly across the ship. And why is this important? Because, like I said, sometimes they damage the ship and you are all the way up to the helm and the engines were damaged and you need to run as fast as possible, get to the other side of the ship. And because they are attacking you, it's very difficult to move through the ship. It feels kind of like a sea vessel. It's constantly shaking and moving to the side, so you need to, sometimes your movement is reduced because of that. It gets really exciting. Now let's talk about the included scenarios. I am not going to talk about specifics to avoid spoilers, because there are going to be many players watching this video, but I will tell you my general opinion on them. It really is a flaw that they introduce so few or so little when it comes to the rules, the mechanics during the first 3 scenarios. In fact, like I said, I'm going to avoid spoilers, but there is one scenario that is so boring, so tedious for the game master, for the one controlling the enemies. You only do one thing. Well, if you count a setup element at the beginning of the scenario, well, those are 2 things, but you do that just once, and the rest of the game you do the same action over and over and over and over again. It's really boring. I can easily see how some people could play those scenarios and think, oh, this is it, this game is horrible. But please, stay for the other scenarios, because that's when things get really interesting. You will have to control the shields protecting the ship. If you have greater protection, then you will have a better chance at surviving a direct firefight with the enemy ship. But at the same time, the teleportation maneuvers are going to be quite difficult to make, because the shield gets in the way of the teleportation beam or device. In other scenarios, you will have to decode secret information. You will have to modify the cannons of the ship to switch between a powerful single shot or like a scatter shot sort of effect to destroy perhaps several missiles at the same time. In other cases, You may have to put someone, a member of your crew, inside of a missile and shoot that player in a sort of pod to penetrate the enemy ship and carry out an assault. And things get really tense. You do get into those moments of downward spiral where you get too wounded or that the ship is about to be destroyed, but if you are quite strategic, you may end up saving the situation. You could have those moments in which all things almost seem impossible to turn around or to rescue the situation, but then you teleport yourself into the ship of the enemy and you get some lucky shots, you manage to reach the helm and you take over the entire enemy ship. In other cases, you will have to perform scans, you will launch probes to get closer to a certain location and decode secret information. In other cases, you will have to face off against very weird entities from outer space. It turns into a sort of horror sci-fi experience. In other moments, you will have to steal data from an enemy ship or take control of an entire ship. It really feels as if you are controlling a very complicated vehicle, quite complex, because the ship, for example, if you set it at a certain speed, it keeps on going. You need to make another check to reduce the speed, to turn it around. It moves. It reminds me a bit of BattleTech, so you'll have to change the facing several times, but as your ship loses control because of the damage it has taken or other effects, the checks become more difficult. And for example, you could be a bit like a speed devil and you raise the speed of the ship as much as possible, but then it's going to be very difficult to maneuver the ship because of all the speed that you gained, and you may end up colliding with something. Although at the end of a number of phases, the power and the speed of the ship is reduced a little, so you have a bit of a chance to recover yourself from that situation. If you move too close to a planet, depending on the scenario, your ship may be affected by the atmosphere of that planet. You will also have to take into consideration conditions for landing and launching, helm maneuvers. You will also have to face off against assaults and ambushes. Perhaps you are surrounded by a minefield. Overall, there are so many things that you can do with this game each phase. There is always something, and sometimes, depending on the situation, you will have to go out of your comfort zone, depending on your profession. So for example, maybe the pilot of the ship suddenly has to teleport himself into the enemy ship, or he will need to control the cannons because the marine is dead, or maybe he needs to make a science check because the scientist is wounded or is in another place of the ship and is using some sort of like the med kit. So it's those moments when tactics really come into play. It gets insanely exciting. So overall, what do I think of Battlestations 2nd edition, the box set? You have to take something very important into consideration. If you're planning to get this as a starter set for the complete game, containing all the rules, that is the advanced rulebook that contains the information on how to use the species and other tokens included in this box set, then definitely get it immediately. This is an amazing game. And when it comes to the RPG aspect, the core set doesn't include too many role-playing opportunities. It feels more like a board game. But because I played it with my RPG players, we were so into role-playing the introduction to each scenario. They were talking to the non-player characters described in the flavor text for the scenario, so there are some role-playing game opportunities. But I imagine that the advanced rulebook contains a lot more when it comes to the things that you can do with the setting, because there are also modules and adventures that are sold like your typical RPG module. So I think the role-playing aspect is quite rich, and because of all the things that you can do, it's pretty much a complete role-playing game that somehow tricks you into thinking that it's a board game. But if you want to play this, if you want to get this as a board game, as a standalone board game, like I said, you have to feel comfortable with the idea that some of the material included is not, you don't have the rules on how to use it. You will have to create your own rules, or get the advanced rulebook later on. But this is an amazing game. It's one of those games that you think, well, the designer is probably a bit of a genius because of the way he integrates the space battles with fights inside of the ship. I really like the feature of having the space map on one side of the table and the ships on the other side. That's another thing to consider. You may want to play this on the floor if you don't have a large table. It covered all of my wargaming table, and we only had, well, I think it's fairly easy to accommodate perhaps, yes, up to 6 players, but it all depends. The thing that makes it easy for you to have several people in the same table is that they only have these small cards and sheets that are not that big, so I don't think that would be too much trouble. Now, concerning the solo rules, like I said, they are included in the advanced rulebook. Because I don't have that rulebook yet, I don't know if they are good or bad. I have heard that they are somewhat of an afterthought, that is, they are not like the strongest point of the game, but I would definitely like to take a look at them to see if I can support them or complement them in some way with my knowledge on solo tools for role-playing games and board games. So overall, despite the criticisms that I mentioned, this game gets my highest recommendation. There are so many things that you can do, and I love those games that take perhaps 2 hours or more. And it depends on the analysis paralysis on the parts of the players, but I like those long games that do not feel like they overstay their welcome. There are so many options, so many actions, so many checks, so many things that you can do during each turn. But this game rewards intelligent play. If you're approaching this with a mentality of let's just go crazy and do whatever we like, you are going to be destroyed. This is a game for tacticians. It requires great strategy. If you don't think a few steps ahead of what is going to happen, if you don't consider the possible outcomes, you're going to be crushed quite easily. It may actually feel a bit stressful, because there are some moments, because of poor choices, that you end up too wounded and the ship is out of control and the key modules for a particular scenario are damaged or destroyed, and now you see that the defeat is so close and you cannot do anything. But as I mentioned, that happens when you do not think about your situation. If you are quite tactical, if you have a strategy and the flexibility to adapt that strategy to change some tactics, then every turn feels like a mind game or a puzzle to solve. So definitely get this one, in my opinion. If I get my hands on the advanced rulebook, I am also going to review that one. Oh, and just in case you are thinking, maybe you are considering getting this game, but you want to know if you can play this in a planet or in the wilderness, because all of the things that I have mentioned happen in space, inside of the ship or in the space sector map. There is a sequel game called Dirt Side, and as I understand it, the solo rules or co-op rules for that one are better fleshed out. So you may want to get that one if you are more into ground combat, although I haven't played that one yet, so I don't know if it's good or bad. Well, thanks for watching this review. If you have any comments or questions, please let me know. And thank you so much to those of you that have been supporting the channel by sending drive-thru RPG gift certificates. If anyone else wants to further support the channel, the information on how to do that will be in the description below. Once again, thank you, and see you later.